Hi friends, welcome to another video of AWS series. So in this video, we are going to talk about a special access management service in AWS, which is IAM. Okay, so IAM stands for Identity Access Management. So this Identity Access Management, right? So it is a service which basically has so IAM stands for identity, so access, so management, right? So this IAM is useful for onboarding users into the AWS account, creating separate group of people into AWS account, right? So assigning permissions directly to the users or directly to the groups. So we'll see each and every topic one by one. So first of all, when you have AWS account in your enterprise level, right? So you will be having different organizations for that account. So these organizations will be kind of diversifying your environment between different projects, right? So in your organization, let's say your project name is some XYZ, right? So an organization inside the AWS account will be created with the name of XYZ. And after that, into that particular XYZ organization, you are going to onboard users. Okay. Let's say, for example, a user named Sunil has joined in your particular project as a DevOps engineer or a AWS administrator, right? So Sunil should have AWS access as a IAM user. So in my last sessions, I have talked about different types of users in IAS. So let me come to that. So types of users in IAM, right? So this in IAM, we have two different types of users. One is root account, which is directly the admin account. Okay, so this is the account used to create or to set up AWS subscription, right? So this is the account which is used for setting up AWS subscription. And I have one more account called IAM account, right? So or IAM user. So this IAM user is kind of creating a custom user, and assigning policies into assigning policies to that particular user. Okay, so you have two different types of users. One is root user, which is the admin account. So that means the very first time when you are going to set up AWS account, free tier account, so whatever the credentials that you have used, so that credentials is considered as root account. So by default, root account will have a complete administrative privileges. And points to be remembered, you cannot delete any root account, right? You cannot delete any root account. So root account cannot be deleted. That means you are not going to delete root user from the AWS, but completely you can dismantle the AWS account itself. The AWS subscription itself, you can completely dismantle or cancel by talking to the support team. You can completely close your AWS account. So, but when it comes to IAM user, so there are certain flexibilities. You can create the user, right? You can delete the user, and you can modify permissions for the user when it comes to IAM, right? So you can create, delete, and modify the permissions for user. So this is considered to be IAM user, right? So there are two different types of users, root and IAM. So root account is admin account, which is created while setting up the AWS subscription, and root account cannot be deleted, and it is having a complete administrative access by default, right? So IAM users, where you are creating the users into the AWS and deleting the users from that particular AWS account and modifying the permissions for their user, that is called IAM user. Right, so now you got the idea about what is root and what is IAM. Now let's jump into the actual IAM concepts. The very first concept, that is user, that is just now we have discussed. The second concept is kind of policy, right? Policy is nothing but, for example, there are two services in AWS, right? So let's take an example. Of course, there are a lot of 200 plus services in AWS, but for my IAM user, which I'm going to onboard, he or she should have only EC2 permission, right? EC2 permission. So that means you need to create a policy to attach that policy to the user so that user can have either EC2 read, right? So read or write permission. Okay, so this is very mandatory that we consider as a policy, right? So there are certain restrictions here, right? So there are certain flexibilities as well. When you create a user, right, you can directly attach policy to the user, first point. And the second point is you can add that user into any existing groups, or you can create a new group for the users. Okay, so let's say, for example, in general terms, what is group? So group is nothing but some group of a collection of things, or a collection of people, or a group of people. So that we consider as group, right? So when you create user one in your AWS account, let's say the user one, by designation, he is a developer, right? And I'm going to create another user, which is user two. He is also the same, right? So now, so for both the users, I mean, for user one and user two, should have only EC2 read write permissions, right? These permissions I should have for both user one and user two. Okay, so these two users should have EC2 read and write. So that means you can combine these two users and create a group, and you can directly attach the permissions for the group, and that permissions will applicable for these two users as well. So let me put it in simple way. So let me open my Paint. So he is a user one and he is a user two, right? So he is user one, U1, and he is user two, U2. Okay, so these two users should have access to, okay, these two users should have access to EC2 service, right? So this is EC2 service. So these two users can do anything. So they can create they can create a EC2 instance, they can launch a EC2 instance, or they can also delete a EC2 instance, they can modify a EC2 instance. That means they are having read and write permissions for EC2 service, right? So these two users are going to have read and write. So two permissions they should have. So what happens, I want to attach the same permissions for another 10 users, right? I have 10 more users. So manually, I'm going to create a user and again go to the policy and attach the policy, which is a tedious task, right? Okay, which is a tedious task. So instead of assigning the user's policies, I mean policy to each and every user individually, instead of that, I am going to create a group. right? So I'm going to create a group. So that means I have this particular group, and this group is, we call it as developers. Okay, so this group we call it as developers. Okay, so these developers all should have only EC2 service access. So in this group, right, in this group, I'm going to add user 1, user 2, user 3, and so on and so forth. Many users, many users. And what I'm going to do, directly I'm going to give a permission for this user. What is the permission? The same EC2, EC2 service, and the permission is read and write. So got it right? So instead of attaching permissions for individual users, I'm going to attach permissions for users who are collectively called as developers, right? So let's see the hands-on. So let's go to the AWS account. This is my AWS account. Go to the search bar, type for IAM, so which is Identity Access Management. And you can see the description over here, manage access to AWS resources, right? So when you click on this service, it will redirect you to the IAM dashboard. So in this IAM dashboard, so let's see how to create a user, right? So always remember your root account should have multi-factor authentication enabled, which is a which is a best practice. Okay, so now see here, this is the dashboard of IAM service, right? So there are a lot of sections: access management, access reports, and I have IAM identity center, right? Okay, so let's create a user. Go to the users box. So here I'm in my users dashboard. I have a lot of users. So let me create a new user. For creating a new user, you can click on add user, and you can give the name as user one. Okay, user hyphen one. So here, this is a bit confusing. So you can read the description. Second, how select how these users will primarily access AWS. So if you choose only programmatic access, it does not prevent users from accessing the console. That means if you choose only programmatic access, this access, it does not prevent users from accessing from the console. Console is nothing but the user interface which you are seeing. That means I have logged into the AWS account through the browser and I'm accessing multiple services, right? So you can, using the console and assumed role. So access keys and auto-generated passwords are provided in the last step. Okay, so that's fine. So let's see what kind of access at what point of time I need to give to this particular user. Okay, so in a real world scenario, let us consider a real world scenario. I have developers, right? I want my developers, they should not access any AWS console. They should only have CLI permission, right? Of course, they can access the console, but they cannot do any operations. They can only have programmatic access so that they can execute some AWS CLI commands and they can modify, update, or get data about the services. In that scenario, I need to provide programmatic access, right? You got it right? So programmatic access means the user who can write some code and do the automation in AWS, or the user who uses AWS CLI commands to modify or update and delete and create resources in AWS. It's pretty simple, right? So if my developers does not want to have any access to the console, of course, I'm going to give programmatic access, right? So go to the IAM again, and here there is another section called password, AWS Management Console Access. That means you can set up a access level such as the user should have a password and he can access the AWS account with the help of that password, right? So if you just click on it, so you will get this option. And when you uncheck, you cannot see any options, right? So that means the user one will only have access key and secret key as authentication procedure. So, and when you click on password, so that means the user can also use his or her password for authenticating the AWS account. So, which is pretty interesting. Okay, so I have programmatic access and I have management console access. Both I have enabled, but let me uncheck my password. So I don't have any console access. Rather, I can have an access for access key and secret key ID. Okay, so use next permissions. So here the thing is, I am directly attaching policies to the user. So how to attach the policies? So you see set by permissions boundary. When you expand this, you can come here, create user without a permission boundary, or use a permissions boundary to control maximum users permissions. So that means there are lot of number of policies that I want to attach to this user. You can limit it. Okay, this user should have only 10 policies enabled for him. Okay, so this is how the set permissions boundary is. So now here you have three options: add user to the group, the one which we have discussed over here. So if I have created a user directly, so what AWS is saying, it is asking us to add the user to the group. So that means I can add user one to the developer group. And when I click on add create a group, it will ask me to select the existing groups and attach the policy for it. Okay, so let me create a group name. So I'm going to give test. I don't have the group, right? So I don't have the test group, but still I'm going to use it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a complete AWS administrator access. So that you see here, you click on create group. So directly group will be created and access level administrator will be assigned to the test user. Okay, so you can directly do this. So instead of that, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to attach policies directly. You see the third option, attach existing policies directly to the user. So when you click on it, you will be able to see all the policies that are listed out here. Okay, so for this particular user, I only want to have EC2. So what I can do is EC2. And when I click on EC2, so if you scroll down a little bit, here you have two service levels. EC2 full access, that means he can have EC2 read access and write access. And the another one, EC2 read only access. That means he can only read the instances. Rather, he cannot update or he cannot delete. Okay, which is pretty important. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give EC2 read only access. So he should not update anything, right? So let's scroll down and click on tags. So you can attach tags to the particular user. Okay, so that is completely optional. You can attach or not attach, that completely fine. And mark for review and review all the permissions that you have assigned to him. And we don't have console access, you only have the programmatic access, right? So and when you click on create user, you will be having a CSV file which will give you the access key details and secret key details. If you don't download the CSV file now, rather after the only access key will be present, secret key will be appeared. So that means it will show only one time on the UI. So for that reason, we need to download the CSV file immediately once you create a user. Of course, I got my CSV file downloaded and I'm going to click on close. Now let's see how the CSV file look like. So how the CSV file will help us to access AWS services, right? So I'm going to click on the CSV file. Okay, so I got the details. I have my access key over here. I have my secret key over here, and I have a link to log in into the console. Okay, so here the username user-1. So we have not set any password for it. That means you can attach the user or you can access the AWS resources from the CLI. So let's open any CLI. Let us check in this particular Git bash whether I have AWS CLI installed on it. Let's check with the command called AWS version, right? Okay, so I got AWS version. I got AWS CLI, which is 2.9.4, and it is running on Python 3.9, and it is running on Windows 10 operating system, and it is running on AMD 64-bit processor, and the prompt was off. So this is what the content I got when I see AWS CLI installed on top of my laptop. So now, guys, you might have got it out. What is AWS CLI? So AWS CLI is a process of a package, a command line utility, which AWS offers us to interact with the AWS account and perform the admin related operations. Okay, so you can do all the operations related to the DevOps, related to the infrastructure, related to the cloud management, everything you can do with CLI. So that means, so what I can do? So how can I check whether my AWS CLI, which is installed on my laptop, is going to interact with the AWS account console? So we'll see that in the next video. So we have attached and created a user with a policy called administrator, and we have attached only programmatic access. Now let's create another user with programmatic access as well as console access. Now click on add user. Okay, so when you click on add user, give the name test user, or I'm going to give a name as user-2, and I'm going to give both the access levels, access key and secret key, as well as password to manage my AWS account through console. So I'm going to set up my custom password. I don't want to show my password. I will give a password like something called, which is to a certain extent. And so if you carefully read this option, require password reset. So that means user must create a new password at next sign in. Okay, so this is pretty important. So user must create a password at next sign in. So now I don't want this because I have already set up a custom password. So for that reason, I'm going to uncheck and go to the permissions next. So you can save or never, that's completely your option. So I prefer never. And I can directly attach policies from here. I'll give the EC2 full access, right? So I'll give EC2 full access to that particular user. So this is EC2 full access so that he can read and write. So go to the JSON content. So Hackathon load balancing is allowed, cloud watching is allowed, creating a service role is allowed, and all these services will be allowed for modifying. Okay, so on the action of EC2, the resource, it is allowed. So when you click on star, that means under EC2, whatever the resources are there, so that are allowed. Okay, so fine, let's go to the policy summary. So you can see what are the different access that you will get when you attach EC2 full access. So you got CloudWatch full access, and you got auto scaling full access, and you got ELB full access, and you got IAM write access. So if you just attach EC2 full access, you are going to get all the details which are special features of EC2. Okay, we'll discuss that in later. So now this is how you can create a user and attach the permissions, right? Through give the access level to the management console, go to the tags, that's completely again optional, go to the review. So I have given programmatic access as well as console access, and I'm going to give EC2 full access and create a user. You've got a CSV file immediately. Better, I recommend to download this or click on send an email, right? So you can send an email directly from here, from your custom email. Let's say I'm going to give this email. Okay, so I'm going to click on send. So now I will be getting the AWS. Okay, so that's fine. So this is how the AWS user can be onboarded with the help of a management console and from the CLI. So you just close this, and what we can do is we try to access the AWS account with that particular user account, IAM user account. So let's open this. Okay, so I have my console login. Let's take this console, Control C, go to the Edge browser and paste it over here. So we will be logged into the AWS account as a IAM root user. Okay, so the username that I given is user-2, and the password I remember, and I'm going to sign into the account. Yes, we have signed into the AWS management console. Okay, so guys, that's it. We have created a EC2 instance, IAM user. We have given read and write permissions from the EC2 console, and I have accessed the AWS account with the help of that particular IAM user. All right. Thanks for the thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the session. And if you do like my content, please share and subscribe my channel. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye bye.